You spent so much time watching them bedded and just following them around. Did you ever get to a point where you could kind of guess when they would move? And did you ever figure out what the trigger was for movement?
No, except for the evenings. The one thing I started noticing at one point, I was, because whenever I input my data, then I do it in these big blocks where it's, you have a deer that's bedding, and I document the fact that he was bedding, and then all of these variables based off of the fact that he's bedding and what's taking place. And then as soon as he starts moving, that's an event. Now he's moving, carry on. And one of the times I was putting in, it was for the same deer. I'd researched him for a week and a half or so. And every time I would put in the time frame that he was standing back up from his bed from the middle of the day, it was within 5 minutes of either side of it. And it was like, why are you doing that? And like it finally started clicking for me. It's just like, why are you standing at the same time? So I started going back and rewatching and kind of looking back at the weather variables. And the main thing that happened was that was kind of at the peak temperature for that day, and that's whenever it started switching. So in theory, that's whenever thermals starting to switch and swirl in his area, and he would just stand up. So the moment that I saw that, I started really paying attention to that every single time I'd go out and watch a deer. And you could almost just look at your weather app on your phone, and whatever the peak temperature was for that day, as soon as it started to kind of drop off, within 10 to 15 minutes of that time frame, he was going to be standing up. And I saw it time and time again, and it was just like, this is kind of freaky. And whenever I say stand up and move, that doesn't particularly mean that he was like standing up and just leaving. Sometimes he would stand up for 30 minutes and he would just browse around in his little bedding area. He'd clean himself. Maybe another deer would come in and they would kind of clean and, whatever on their faces and whatnot. And then he would move out. But, yeah, the main point was the fact that they would get up at that time frame. So.
Oh, that is interesting. See,
Yeah.
that. I mean, we've all been there. Like you're in the stand or whatever, and then it gets to that certain point in the evening, and like you just kind of feel it switch. Like the sun gets low enough where most of the things are shaded, and you're like, all right, you got the head on a swivel. Like you just kind of know intuitively as a hunter.
Yeah.
When you've been hunting for a while. But so nothing with like the moon, nothing with weather, none of that.
Yeah, no, I haven't pieced anything together with the moon. Weather, I mean, there's some potential things with weather and bedding locations that I've seen where like strong inclement weather is causing deer to kind of tuck themselves deeper and further. But I've also seen this one buck bed on the windward side of a ridge, 25-mile-per-hour winds, spitting ice straight into his face. He's just facing the weather. Just eating it. And he's getting ice build up on his antlers as he's sitting there looking into the storm. And it's like, what are you doing? It just goes against all, because like you start thinking you're seeing a repetitive pattern, and it's like, okay, like maybe this is kind of potentially groundbreaking. And then all of a sudden a deer does that, and it's like, well, throw that out the window. It's just
David Goggins' buck stay hard.
I was gonna say Doe might have broke up with him.
The other thing, just while we're talking about, like you were saying, like it seemed like that when that temperature started dropping, deer kind of get them on their feet. Did you see anything with certain conditions with fronts pushing it in a temperature drop midday or anything like that? If that affected anything?
Not too often. I think that also whenever you're getting that happening, I was probably paying more attention to the wind shifting that was taking place more than the temperature change that was occurring, because a lot of the times for me last year, whenever that was happening, it was happening in the middle of the day. So Buck had already done his morning travel route, and say you had a south wind at 2, 3, 4 miles per hour, and then here comes a storm, big cold front coming back from the north, and that wind starts shifting around to the west and then all the way back around to the north. And I was able to see that, and I was correlating it more to wind than I was temperature. But from what I'd seen, that does do something. It causes bucks to get up on their feet. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that the reason that they do get up and move based off of a wind shift isn't as much for the advantage for where they're bedding. I think that where they're bedding would have been, because in some scenarios I would see a buck bedded on the leeward side of a ridge for a north wind, and it's a south wind, and it's just kind of going against that logic. But he's down in he has a massive thermal advantage where he's located. And then the wind shifts around to be a north wind, and all of a sudden he decides he needs to get up and walk around this entire ridge system and relocate himself completely. And I think the reason he was doing that is because he had a predetermined notion as to where he was going to be that evening based off of the conditions that were happening with the south wind. And then as soon as everything started shifting, he realized that area is not going to work. So he starts shifting around into a completely different location to give himself a better advantage for that evening time frame, if that makes sense. I don't think it's as much trying to relocate himself for a betting advantage as much as it is trying to relocate himself for an advantage whenever he gets back on his feet for the evening.
Oh, that's a really interesting thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Since you track this bucks, I'm sure you saw them making scrapes, rubs, all kind of laying down all kinds of sun, I'm sure. Did you see any consistent usage of scrapes or scrape locations or anything interesting you found from scraping activity?
Yeah. No, I would say that there is definitely something to the idea of a scrape being hot at certain times and then it kind of going back cold for another certain time frame and then it being reactivated and be hot again for whatever reason. And then there's some that they're community scrapes and they're always hammered nonstop. And I mean there were definitely probably 4 scrapes across the main property that I'd researched that were hit consistently by different deer, many different deer, and at all times throughout the season. From as soon as they started, kind of in that October-ish time frame, and maybe in September, and then all the way into February, I'd seen them hit it. So if that kind of answers that a little bit, I didn't focus on them as much as I probably could have, but.
This is more so I was thinking like following a certain deer and you seeing him hit scrapes potentially.
Yeah.
That's kind of more where I was thinking. But by the way, those 4 scrapes you said that would get consistent activity. Was there any similarities between bedding, food cover, water, anything like that with those locations, or travel paths or funnels or anything like that?
For the community scrapes, oftentimes I was finding those ones to be kind of the most popular spot for me, at least, was around a pond bank. If you kind of wrapped around the side of a pond bank right up against the wood edge, that little area it seemed to be pretty popular for the community scrapes, at least.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
What are some maybe discrepancies that you feel like you've seen where you think maybe GPS studies are either missing something or maybe getting something wrong in comparison to you just literally watching a deer all day and seeing what it's doing?
Yeah. I think in the end, actually, a lot of it kind of supports one another. Because like you said, if you look at some of the numbers that I've kicked out and some of the numbers that they've kicked out, they're actually relatively similar. But the thing that GPS color studies are going to miss over anything is they're really, really good at picking out movement, and then they're really, really good at picking out kind of general bedding areas. But it's going to be just those individual behavior type things. And also in a situation where, say, a buck beds down in the middle of the day or at 10 a.m. or something, and he gets bumped up and he starts moving again. In a GPS color study, all you're going to know is that he stood up out of his potential bedding area and he walked out of it for a really unknown reason at that time. And you can start looking at weather variables and all these different things, but I can tell you whether or not a coyote just came in and bumped him out, and that's why he did it. And I can tell you whether or not potentially doe and estrus just walked 30 yards past him and he kind of got a little bit interested and he stood up and he walked down and crossed over to the other area and scent checked the ground right behind where she had just walked, and then he decided probably not and bedded back down. So these little types of things that you're just not going to get until you have video on them, those are really the main advantage for a thermal drone over a GPS color.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. No, but in terms of having like a dramatic difference between the research that I've had, I can't really say that there's a massive one. I would say that my movement data is going to be a lot more accurate because, I mean, I have 24/7 footage of the deer that I'm watching, and I can guarantee you how many steps he took. I can tell you how many times he defecated. I can tell you everything that he did throughout that time frame. All of the weird little nitty-gritty things, I can tell you it all. Whereas a GPS collar, it's just like, well, he's probably bedding here, he's probably moving here, and he's probably bedding here, he's probably feeding here. Like, it's just a lot more basic on the format.
Man, it's so crazy. After you've done this 1-year study, what would change from 3 or 4 years ago to this year based on what you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think back in the day, because I've hunted public before, whenever I would go on public, I was still kind of in the mentality of getting away and really trying to go deeper where all these other ladder stands and whatnot weren't. But I wouldn't I wouldn't focus on that pretty much at all. I wouldn't care what anybody else is doing on the property. In fact, I would be looking for those extreme habitat diversity. And if you didn't have habitat diversity, then I would probably try and go and find another place to hunt. But if not, and I was limited to that, then I would start looking at terrain features and creating these types of invisible funnels like what I talk about. And then I would hunt high odds areas where there's saddles and try to find whatever their available food source is going to be. Because really your hunting strategy, it's not going to stay the same from the beginning of season to the end of season, or at least it shouldn't. Because in the beginning of season, like right now, all the deer are going to be going to food. That's their main goal. That's where they are mentally. And then as everything starts kind of shifting in my area towards the pre-rut and kicking into that, then mature bucks are going to expand and they're going to spread out of their area. They're going to split from their bachelor groups, and then they're going to start entering the phase where they make those longer morning travel treks. And so yeah, I mean, in early season, I'm trying to find food wherever they're going, whether it's that feed tree or if you're hunting ag, whether it's a field of soybeans, and then trying to piece together how they're going from that section and making it into the food. And then the later you go into the season is where I would really start to harp on the terrain features a little bit more than anything, and try to hunt habitat diversity plus terrain features.